And greetings, saints of the Most High. Welcome to the Messianic Torah Observer's Sabbath Thoughts and Reflections. I'm Rod Thomas, and I want to thank you for fellowshipping with me here on this blessed day of rest. For it is here that we gather every Shabbat to delve into Yehovah, Yahweh Yahuwah, however you declare his name, his eternal words of life, his instructions in righteousness, which happen to be our constitution and the very foundation of our covenant relationship with the creator of the universe. And as always, beloved, it is my hope, trust, and prayer that this installment of the Messianic Torah Observer's Sabbath Thoughts and Reflections finds you, your families, and fellowships well and blessed. Well, I have to tell you, I am so happy to be back here from our hiatus, our 1 month hiatus, actually. A trip that we took back to Southern California, my former home state, home stomping grounds. I don't know what you would call it, but it was where we came from. And we relocated last year, 2021, here to the North Texas area. And we had some previous business that was left undone that we needed to take care of. So we took the opportunity and drove back and spent 3.5 weeks taking care of these things. And our trip was extended a few other days, a few more days beyond what we had originally planned because of some setbacks and things that were a little out of our control, but it was okay. It wasn't all business. We were able to visit and have a great time with our kids, who are all adults, by the way, and as well as we got some time to spend with our 2 grandchildren, and that was a glorious time to be had. But we're back, and we're ready to get back to work, looking at options for the future. Last time I took a hiatus a month long, well, last couple times was back in 2017, which was almost 3 months hiatus. And then in last year when we were relocating, it was like a 6-week hiatus. So I need to... And how we doing here in 2022, we've got a month hiatus, and I want to try to prevent those, what I call hiatus, from cropping up every so often. And generally, I try my best not to leave TMTO unattended for several days and weeks. But unfortunately, life happens and things prevent us from actually posting during those times that we're away. I'm looking at options, looking at technology, looking at technique and sequences and things of that nature to try to mitigate those absences in the future. So thank you for those of you who have stayed with us and who have actually prayed for us and expressed concerns that we weren't here. We're going to try to do better, because as these days continue to be darkened and darkness progresses and evil continues to grow in and around us and in our country these days, we want to make sure that we stay relevant. Not relevant in the world's way of looking at things, but at least relevant to the body of Messiah, as much as Father will permit and allow, and is within his perfect will. Because I know that we rely on one another. This program relies on you, and I rely on you, and I get just as much from these discussions and teachings as I pray you do. The preparation, the prayer, the meditation, and all helps build me so that I can come alongside and fellowship with you and hopefully relay some of these eternal and essential truths of Torah living, focused, Yeshua-focused Torah living, that is. The elect way of walking in this faith that is so important to us, especially in these last and evil days. So glad to be back. We're back in the saddle and we're ready to get back to work. And just so you're aware, because of time constraints with this posting, I really wanted to get this post out today, and I was running out of time. You should have saw me yesterday. I was stressing out, and I had to stop and petition Father, and it came to me that, you know what, I'm going to have to get this post out, and I'm going to have to look at ways to make sure and facilitate that this post does get out in a timely manner. So for those of you who view our post on YouTube, there will be no PowerPoint built into this discussion, as we have been doing over the last several sessions. And I fully intend to return to the PowerPoint aspect of and expand it even in our discussions in the next posting, Abba willing. But for today, it usually takes me the better part of a half a day to build a PowerPoint based on our discussion. So I won't be having that in this post, but pray that it will be there next discussion. As I'm recording and posting this installment of TMTO, Sabbath Thoughts and Reflections here today, we are just about a week into the fifth biblical month. The fifth biblical month started, I believe it was this past Sunday. Hate to use the pagan names of the calendar week and month, but just for convenience sake, we just started. And so we are actually a few days into the fifth biblical calendar month for those of you who keep the observational calendar. There are no mandated feasts of Yah slated during this quiet portion of Yah's biblical calendar year. But we will be heading headlong, actually, into the fall feast, which is only less than 2 months away. 2 months away. We're here in the fifth biblical month, actually a weekend. Then we have the sixth biblical month, which is 30 days away. And then after that, we're at the seventh biblical month. Okay, so we literally have just a couple months before the fall feast hit, and you know what those consist of. Feast of Trumpets, Yom Teruah, followed 10 days later by Yom Kippurim, or the Day of Atonement, and then the 8-day celebration of Sukkot, or the Feast of Tabernacles, all crammed, just like back in the fall, in the spring feast. We had those three. Well, we have the three here coming up in the seventh month, just 2 months away. So if you haven't set out to take those days off that are coming in the seventh month, just a few months away, you might want to start making plans to do that. If you don't have a feast site that you will be pilgriming to, I would encourage you to start looking around, because those site options are rapidly diminishing. We had our eyes on one feast site that I have not heard back from the facilitators, so I'm assuming it's a no-go for us on that. So we're desperately searching for a Sukkot feast site. There's a couple options that have come to our attention, but we're not sure we're going to take that, so we're petitioning Father to show us where He wants us to be this year. So just be aware of that, because these days will crop up on you before you even know it, and the next thing, you're kind of left out in the cold if you didn't make previous arrangements. However, this weekend, many devout Jews around the world will be observing the Jewish Memorial Day, formally known as Tisha B'Av, known more widely as the 9th of Av. And today, this Shabbat is known as Shabbat Kazon. Shabbat Kazon. And the first part of this discussion, I really want to bring these 2 days to your attention and kind of fill you in on what these days, this Shabbat Kazon and the 9th of Av are all about. And they're kind of encapsulated in this weekend. And I think it's important for you to be aware of them, not because I'm encouraging you to keep these days, but simply because many within our faith community will be observing them. And I want you to be aware of what this stuff is all about so that you can make prayerful and wise decisions whether or not you're going to keep those days or not. According to Hillel's calendar, which I frequently refer to as the Jewish calculated calendar, as I am recording and posting this installment of TMTO Sabbath Thoughts and Reflections, this being August the 6th, 2022, or 8/6 of 2022, it is the 9th of Av. Again, Av, which is a Babylonian name assigned by the sages to the biblical calendar. Remember, Father never gave names to the months of his biblical calendar year. The only month of the 12-month biblical calendar that was given a name, or at least was given some kind of title, is the first month, which is referred to as the month of the Aviv, or the month of Eve. And we've talked about that in our previous post when we were discussing the spring feast, the so-called spring feast of Yah. But otherwise, the other 11 months of the biblical calendar year have no names assigned to them. They're just delineated by their number. And as I mentioned at the top of this program, at the top of this discussion, we're in the 5th biblical month. And that's the way I tend to mention them when I'm talking about the calendar, is by number. I cannot advocate or promote the use of these Jewish, rabbinic inspired names that definitely came out of Babylon at some point. But for the sake of argument, and so that we can all be on the same page as to what I'm talking about, and to use the terminology that is universally used to describe or to talk about these days, I'm going to make an exception here today and actually mention this pagan name of Av, Av being the 5th month. So it is the 9th of Av, or otherwise known as Tisha B'Av. Tisha B'Av, according to Hillel's reckoning of the biblical calendar this year. However, because the 9th of Av, the 9th of Av, has fallen on a weekly Sabbath this year, this Gregorian calendar year of 2022, again, according to their calendar reckoning, the Hillel calendar reckoning, the rabbis have determined that this Memorial Day of the 9th of Av cannot be observed on the 9th of Av, but rather observed tomorrow, which will be in their calendar the 10th of Av, which of course will be the first day of the week, the 10th of Av, or it will fall out on August the 7th, 2022. You can't have, according to the rabbis, any holiday, any observance fall out on a weekly Sabbath, according to the rabbis. And so the rabbis have been renowned to dislodge and relocate even Father's mandated feast to other days of the calendar, so that if they fall out on the weekly Sabbath, who gave them the authority to do that? They took the authority themselves. Although they claim that Moshe gave them that authority to do it. But this is the practice of the rabbinites to move these days, although again, the 9th of Av is not a mandated feast. It's a rabbinically created holiday. In this case, it's a Memorial Day. So Jews around the world will be celebrating the 9th of Av on Sunday. And they will be observing Shabbat Kazan here on this Shabbat, on the 6th of August. I guess it really doesn't matter, since the 9th of Av is a rabbinically invented holiday. It is not, as I just mentioned, a mandated feast of Yehovah. No doubt, however, many within and outside our faith will observe this day in accordance with the very comprehensive traditions that are associated with keeping this day. And we'll briefly get into what some of those comprehensive traditions are in just a minute. But today being supposedly the Shabbat before the 9th of Av, which it really isn't, but for the sake of argument, the Shabbat before the 9th of Av, it is treated as special. It's a special Sabbath according to rabbinic tradition. And this Shabbat is formally referred to as Shabbat Chazon, which means Shabbat of vision. Shabbat of vision. Now, the so-called rabbinic sages contend that on this particular Shabbat, the Sabbath before the 9th of Av, Shabbat Kazan, Yah's people are granted a vision of the third temple. Now, why are these sages referring to a vision of the third temple on this Shabbat? Well, they refer to the devoted having a vision of the third temple because, in great part, the 9th of Av memorializes the destruction of not just Solomon's temple, but also the destruction of Herod's or Zerubbabel's temple, or the second temple. And because of this, the sages, through their creation of this special Sabbath, this special Shabbat, encourage their devoted ones to not just commemorate the destruction and passing of Solomon's and Herod's temples, but to look ahead with hope for the third temple that will be the centerpiece of the coming kingdom of God. The sages, of course, realize that it is impossible for one to physically see this elusive third temple of the future. So their emphasis is seeing a vision of the third temple. This emphasis on seeing a vision of the third temple is more of an esoteric viewing of it. You see, to these rabbis, the vision of the third temple is seen by one's soul. And in seeing this temple by one's soul, via one's soul, he or she receives the empowerment to break free from their present state of being in some degree of physical exile. You see, Jews still believe they're in physical exile from Jerusalem or from Jerusalem, even though many of them live there. But they still feel that to some extent. You see, for even though one may be residing in Yisrael proper without the presence of the temple, he or she is still in a state of exile to some degree. However, if one reaches out with their soul to embrace this third temple, this visionary third temple, they will effectively bring about their redemption. There's no Yeshua in redemption here at all, but this temple is this visioning of the temple is going to bring about their redemption and the eventual building of this third temple. All of this is going to esoterically lead to the construction and advent of this third temple. Well, my Java for today. It sounds to me like some pretty I don't know about you. It sounds pretty Kabbalistic to me, doesn't it? But I kind of get it. I mean, you figure the Jews' focus has always been the temple. Whether it was Solomon's first temple, or whether it was Zerubbabel or Herod's temple. They've always focused on the temple because the temple represented the very heart and soul of Judaism. So even today, with the temple having been long destroyed, the heart of the Jewish people is still looking back to those glory years when the temple stood and operated as the central element of their religion. I don't know about you, but this level of devotion to the temple sort of borders on worship, on temple worship, doesn't it? Which we know was part and parcel of first century Palestinian Judaism. We kind of talked about this in our series within a series entitled A Question of One's Jewishness, where religious Jews of the first century placed their entire trust and their eternal security in their Jewishness, in all the aspects of their Jewishness, their culture, their history, their circumcision, if you were a dude, even the temple. And let me just say, I am in no way denigrating, I am in no way downplaying the central role the temple played in our sacred history. But we must understand which side our spiritual bread is buttered in this respect, beloved. Because Yah clearly sanctioned the destruction of both temples for some obvious and for some not so obvious reasons. Recall the prophet Ezekiel, who in chilling detail described Yah's presence leaving Solomon's temple. And this is found in chapter 10. I would say start back in chapter 8 and read through chapter 8, 9, and 10 of Ezekiel. It's a chilling overview of Yah's spirit leaving the temple and why Yah's spirit left the temple. And Father's spirit left the temple, his presence departed the temple because Judah brazenly syncretized pagan idolatry worship with worship of the one true Elohim of Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. We've talked about this idea, this concept of syncretizing religion many times on TMTO. And Yah cannot stand syncretization. Yah's vacating of the temple left Jerusalem and Judah proper vulnerable to enemy attack and destruction, which we know did occur sometime around 587, 586 BCE. Because Yah warned our ancient Jewish cousins before all of this happened. He said, I am Yehovah. That is my name. And my glory will I not give to another, neither my praise to graven images. Isaiah chapter 42, verse 8, the KJV rendering. And then Herod's temple, otherwise known and often referred to as Zerubbabel's temple, named accordingly because it was Herod the Great who bankrolled the vast improvements to Zerubbabel's temple, which was dedicated originally at 515 BCE. But Zerubbabel's temple, Herod's temple, was destroyed by the Romans between 68 and 70 of the Common Era. A lot of people say, oh, it was 68 of the Common Era, but this destruction of Jerusalem and of Judah proper took place over the course of a couple years. It was a besieging at first, and then there was the invasion and ultimately the destruction of the temple. Now, there are many reasons offered as to why Yah sanctioned the destruction of Zerubbabel or Herod's temple. And some have postulated it was because the Jews of Palestine, the first century Jews in Palestine, were responsible for our Master's crucifixion. It's possible. It's quite possible. While others take a more practical perspective and view, especially the scholars and the historians, that it was the end result. This destruction of the Second Temple was the end result of political and religious unrest among the first century Jews who were living in Jerusalem at the time, which led to revolt against Rome. And still others, and I fall into this group, others such as myself believe that Yah sanctioned the destruction of Zerubbabel's temple for purposes of scattering his chosen ones, who had become quite content to flourish and walk out their Messianic faith in Jerusalem. They didn't want to go anywhere when Master told them that they had to carry the gospel to the uttermost parts of the earth. But Herod's temple still remained for those Messianic Jews at the time a focal point of their day-to-day walk with Messiah. We see in the book of Acts how the apostles who were headquartered in Jerusalem spent their days in prayer and worship at the temple. Although they were Messianics, they never gave up their Hebrew faith. In many cases, their Jewish faith. They continued in the temple. In prayer, in teachings, it was the central hub of their day-to-day life. And many surmise that if Yah did not remove the temple from their sight, be it physically or spiritually, that the spread of the gospel message would have been stunted or inhibited. And I can't agree more. Not to mention, Father's Spirit wasn't there, nor was the Ark of the Covenant. The Ark of the Covenant was removed from Solomon's temple when Nebuchadnezzar invaded and had the first temple, Solomon's temple, destroyed. So two things were missing. Most importantly, Abba's presence was not there, nor was the Ark of the Covenant. So there really was, it was sort of a hollow edifice. Not taking away from the significance of the temple, mind you. I would never do that. I am amazed by the temple and the history and its operations and its appearance and all the things and what it represented. It's an amazing story, and it's an amazing part of our heritage and history. But putting things in its proper perspective, it was just a shell and served a purpose for only a moment in time. Consequently, it is the destruction of these two temples, along with a few other tragic incidents in Israel's history, that is memorialized by Tisha B'Av, or the 9th of Av. Pious Jews around the world recognize Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av, as, quote, the saddest day, end quote, of the sacred calendar year. Tisha B'Av, or the 9th of Av, is observed by religious Jews with a full fast and prayers throughout the day at their local synagogues. Now, a full fast being no drink or food for the duration of the 24-hour day. Now, the following events are all believed to have taken place on the 9th of Av, although it's still left up to speculation whether these actual events occurred on the 9th of Av, assuming the 9th of Av is a real thing. But I guess it is, isn't it? I don't. But anyway, there's a lot of moving parts to say that all these things happened on the 9th of Av. I hope you're understanding what I'm saying. How can you say that all these things, well, you'll see in a moment. The first thing that happened that they're attributing occurred on the 9th of Av is that our ancient Hebrew cousins were condemned to wander the wilderness for 40 years for refusing to enter the promised land when Yah told them to do so. They say that happened on the 9th of Av. Not sure how they figured that out, but that's what they said. Next, we have the destruction of Solomon's followed by Zerubbabel or Herod's temple, the destruction of both these temples. Both happened, ironically, on the 9th of Av, on Tisha B'Av. Not sure how they figured that, but we do know that the destruction of either temples took days to accomplish. This was a massive edifice. And at the same time as the destruction of these temples, of these two amazing structures were taking place, the Babylonian army, as well as later the Roman army, still had to contend and fight with the Jews. There was ongoing fighting. So the attention was not just the destruction of these two edifices, but it was also putting and quashing down the resistance in Jerusalem at that time. Then we have the Bar Kokhba revolt against Rome in around 133 of the Common Era, which resulted in the extensive depopulation of all Jewish communities in Palestine, especially in Jerusalem. And some place the number of dead from this revolt at around 600,000 Jews. 600,000 from just this revolt. Then we have in 1290 AD that all Jews were expelled from England, all again on the 9th of Av. All of these happened on the 9th of Av, according to the rabbis. And lastly, in 1492 AD, we have the expulsion of all Jews from Spain, again, all on the 9th of Av. And just to show you how comprehensive now, moving on to the actual keeping of the 9th of Av, just to show you how comprehensive the rules and traditions surrounding this day of memorial, how extensive the rabbis were in dictating how one is to keep the 9th of Av, we have the following practices and traditions and laws and rules. As previously mentioned, religious Jews observe a complete 24-hour fast. Okay? There's nothing wrong with fasting. Fasting is good. Fasting should be done on a regular basis, along with prayer and meditation and consecration. There is to be no leather footwear worn by anybody. You can't wear leather shoes. No one is permitted to be immersed in a mikvah. You know, when you go to synagogue, many folks in some synagogues, many of the pious Jews, the religious Jews, undergo immersion before they enter service, and also before the coming or the advent of the weekly Sabbath, which, by the way, will be one of our next discussion topics in our Paul and Hebrew Roots series coming up. Abba willing, next week. Looking forward to the discussion on baptism and mikvah that we will be discussing. So that will be, you don't want to miss these discussions and teachings. It's going to hopefully positively impact your walk with Messiah, as well as inform you on the biblical realities of baptism and mikvah. Okay, so that's coming up. I'm just about done compiling my research, and then I will be this week, Abba willing again, putting these things all together. Continuing on the traditions of the 9th of Av. There are to be no creams or ointments applied to one's body on the 9th of Av. There are to be no marital relations on the 9th of Av. Torah readings are prohibited on the 9th of Av. Gift giving is prohibited on the 9th of Av. There is to be no pleasure travel on the 9th of Av. It means you can't go on vacation on that day. Festive or fine attire is not to be worn on the 9th of Av. The religious are expected to attend synagogue services throughout the day on the 9th of Av, which is good, right? Work is permitted on the 9th of Av, but it is highly encouraged that one begin work, if you must work, after noon on the 9th of Av. One's focus during this 24-hour period is on mourning and repentance. That is the focus on the 9th of Av. And one is expected to contribute extra to charities on the 9th of Av. Now, I wanted to make you aware of this Jewish holiday or memorial and all of its trappings because I understand that a great many folks in our faith community will be keeping this day in one form or another. I was not aware of this. I was aware of the 9th of Av. I've been aware of the 9th of Av for a few years and what it involved and its meaning, but I was kind of surprised to find out how so many people in our faith community are looking forward to keeping the 9th of Av and following the rabbinic practices and traditions, which, again, I personally have no feelings one way or another about true Messianics choosing to observe this rabbinic-made Memorial Day, this rabbinic-made Memorial Day. My only concern is the focus and perspective one should have regarding such extra biblical holidays such as the 9th of Av. And there are many others, the Fast of Tammuz and several other holidays that are scattered along the biblical calendar. But as redeemed of Yah, through the person and ministries of Yehoshua Messiah, we've been called to walk in covenant relationship with the creator of the universe. And in that calling, our master instructed us to, one, seek first and foremost the kingdom of Yah, to live, to walk in kingdom, and two, seek Abba's righteousness. That is, walk in righteousness. Now, whatever mourning there is to do, it should be turned to joy. For our redemption through Yeshua Messiah draws ever so close each passing day. So we don't have time to mourn. Our joy should be in the things of Yah and in the promises Yah has made to us who are his chosen ones. No mourning. Mourning only distracts from our covenant mandate. Mourning has its place, don't get me wrong. There are certain times that we are compelled to mourn, such as the loss of a loved one. But in general, we are to rejoice always. Again, I say rejoice. Furthermore, we are to be about making disciples of the nation peoples of this world for our master Yehoshua. So our focus should not be of the tragic things that occurred previously in our history, although we are wise to take heed and learn from those tragic events. But rather, our focus should be ahead of us, our eyes tuned for the path ahead of us as we await our master's glorious return. Now, is it wrong to keep or observe Tisha B'Av? I know most of you are probably asking that. I'd say no, probably not. But let me say this. Maybe a better question would be, what should I be doing on Tisha B'Av or the 9th of Av to further Yah's kingdom and glorify his name in all the world, all the earth? And I can't answer that question for you. Only you can answer that question as you are so led and instructed by Yah. And so with that, beloved, let's move on into our Torah reading discussion for today. I hope you got something out of that tidbit of a discussion on the 9th of Av, or Tisha B'Av, and Shabbat Chazon. Okay? Now, I've chosen to title this part of our discussion today, He Called You by Name. And by the end of this discussion, I'm certain you will be able to identify with this themed title. Our reading discussion today will be taken from the 44th reading of our 3-year Torah reading cycle. As you know that I follow the 3-year Torah reading cycle. I'm not advocating anyone engage in the Torah readings, but for me and for many in our faith, we employ or we follow the Torah readings, the prescribed Torah readings, which of course are all rabbinically made up. They didn't come from Father. They didn't come from Moshe or the prophets. Definitely didn't come from Yeshua, nor the apostles, but they're rabbinically made up. But I think they were permitted to be put into place, and they have such universal applications attached to them that this Father is permissive in this aspect. And it does serve a very important and vital purpose in our day-to-day walk. It keeps us focused on Yah's word in a structured way, if you will. But again, some people are led to other formats for study of Torah. And then of course, within the rabbinically made Torah readings, there is the 1-year Torah cycle in which you read the entire 5 books of Moshe in 1 year, as opposed to the reading of the entire 5 books of Moshe in a 3-year period, which I follow. But the Torah portion of today's reading is found in Genesis or Bereshit chapter 48, verses 1 through chapter 49, verse 26. Consequently, we won't be discussing this passage today, this Genesis chapter 48 through 49. But rather, I want to discuss a verse from the Haftarah portion of this week's reading. The Haftarahs in the Torah reading, by the way, if you're not aware, are generally the prophets and the writings, portions and passages from the prophets and the writings. And usually those readings are very small in length. And in our particular Haftarah reading for today, it's found in Isaiah or Yeshayahu chapter 43, verses 1 through 7, with a focus on just verse 1. So generally, in the Messianic circles, in our Messianic community, when we engage in the Torah readings or the Torah portions, as many call them, there is the Torah portion, literally Torah portion of the reading that is found in one of the 5 books of Moses, and they follow consecutively week after week. And then there is a Haftarah portion, which is generally, again, the prophets and the writings. And then there's generally a passage from the apostolic writings, or the Brit Hadashah. So if you want to know a little more about these readings and you want to know the schedule in which I follow, please contact me by email, perceptionwp@gmail.com. Again, perceptionwp@gmail.com. If you are looking at our website, the MessianicTorahObserver.org, there is also a SpeakPipe feature that hovers off to the right of the page where you can actually leave a voice message. Haven't heard any voice messages from anybody in the last good year, but that's a feature. I need to check and see if that is still functioning. I haven't heard. But anyway, the most preferred method of contacting me is via the email of perceptionwp@gmail.com. But let's get back to our reading discussion, Isaiah chapter 43, and we're going to be focusing on just verse 1, which reads, "But now thus says the Lord, He who created you, O Jacob, He who formed you, O Israel, fear not, for I have redeemed you. I have called you by name. You are mine." And that was the English Standard Version rendering. Here we find the prophet Yeshayahu, also known as Isaiah. Jehovah is salvation is the meaning of the name Yeshayahu or Isaiah. Jehovah is salvation. Very similar in meaning to our master's name, Yeshua, in the contracted form, or Yehoshua in the compound form, which means Jehovah saves or delivers. Delivers his people, speaking to the nation of Israel. Our focus verse is essentially a continuation of chapter 42, in which Yah addresses with Yisrael, through Isaiah the prophet, Yeshayahu, the spiritual elephant in the room, which was Yisrael's sin and the impending judgment and punishment that would come against the nation. All of this outlined in chapter 42, verses 22 through 25. And so Yah calls Yisrael out for her abandonment in chapter 42, verses 22 to 25. He calls them out because of their abandonment of the covenant that she had with him. Let's just read let's just read verses 24 and 25 of that passage. And it reads in the English Standard Version rendering, "Who gave up Jacob to the looter and Israel to the plunderers? Was it not the Lord, against whom we have sinned, in whose ways they would not walk, in whose laws they would not obey? So he poured on him the heat of his anger and the might of battle. It set him on fire all around, but he did not understand. It burned him up, but he did not take it to heart." So what we clearly see portrayed here is that Yah is not happy with Yisrael at all. And because Yisrael refused to keep her end of the covenant bargain or agreement, they chose to continue in sin. Yah had to harshly judge and then punish Yisrael through Babylonian destruction and captivity. But the amazing thing we see in our Haftarah reading here today, Yeshayahu, Isaiah chapter 43, verses 1 through 7, is a profound expression of Yah's abiding, steadfast love for Yisrael, despite the wrathful anger he just expressed towards her. Despite Yisrael's obstinacy, despite her stiff-neckedness or stiff-neckedness, it's really not a word, so I'm kind of putting this out there, stiff-neckedness or stiff-neckedness. But despite their being stiff-necked, despite incessant propensity to engage in idolatry and violate the terms of the marriage covenant between she and Yah, Yah remains steadfast in his devotion, his love, his keeping of the covenant promises to Yisrael. But being the holy and righteous Elohim he is, Yah cannot allow Yisrael's unrequited, unaddressed sins and her breaking of the covenant to go without judgment and punishment. And we see here a very touching explanation and expression of Yah's abiding love for Yisrael from the Creator's own mouth. And Yah frames this quasi-intervention, if you will, as though he were the father of an unruly child who just won't do right, regardless of how hard the father tries to get the child to listen to reason and straighten up and fly right. Thus, Yah explains to Yisrael just how special she is to him and how he came to choose her as his chosen one, his redeemed one, his precious one, his beloved, the one he will in the end rescue and protect. And through all of this dichotomous rhetoric of disappointing or disappointment to be followed by wrathful judgment and steadfast love and devotion to be followed with deliverance and restoration, Yah always leaves a path and a light home for his wayward loved one, Yisrael. Just as he does with us, beloved, he always He always leaves a pathway and a light for our return to him if we mess up. The only question is, are you going to take that pathway and use that light to get back to him? Or are you going to continue to wallow in sin and in your the ways of the world and in your former, I always do that, in your former way of living? But I must say that I found this reading to be quite powerful. And I rarely, if ever, pay much attention to the Haftarah readings each week, but I will concede here today that I'm certainly glad Abba's Ruach, his spirit, led me to study this week's Haftarah reading. As far as we're concerned for this post, I want only to focus on the first verse, as I mentioned. And this verse alone could take us hours to unpack if we really were led to drill down and dig deep into its eternal riches. We won't be here that long, trust me. But for today, I want to share with you some thoughts, some of my thoughts and reflections that I pray will lead you to conduct your own study and meditation of as it relates to this passage. So in verse 1, Yah mentions or addresses the names Jacob, in the Hebrew Yaakov, and Israel, in the Hebrew Yisrael. We know from Genesis or Bereshit chapter 32 verse 28 that Yah changed Jacob's or Yaakov's name to Israel or Yisrael after his wrestling match with an angel of Yah. And the English Standard Version of that passage reads, "Then he," the he being the angel that Jacob had just wrestled with, says to Jacob, "Your name shall no longer be called Jacob." And Jacob means heel holder, heel, H-E-E-L, heel holder. "Your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Yisrael." Yisrael meaning Yah prevails or Yah is God. "But your name will be called Yisrael, for you have striven with God and with men and have prevailed." So here in our reading, Yah declares to Yisrael that he created, that is, in the Hebrew, bara, that he formed Yisrael. The Hebrew term bara means bringing something into existence. Bara is used in Torah to describe the creation of the universe and the natural phenomena. Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, Genesis chapter 1, verse 21, Genesis chapter 1, verse 27, then Genesis chapter 2, verse 3, and then, of course, there are many allusions to this bara being the formation of the things in the universe and the natural phenomena. The creation without ambiguity, the creation without ambiguity exemplifies the magnitude of Yah's power. The ancient Hebrew term, bara, is associated with the feeding of livestock. Believe it or not. The feeding of livestock. So grain, of course, is typically fed to livestock. And it is that grain that makes one's livestock fat and full and happy, right? So there is this illusion, this association, this connection of Yah birthing and raising Yisrael to serve his purpose, in part by providing and nourishing Yisrael with his words of life, his Torah, making Yisrael fat and prosperous, healthy and prosperous. Bara. Then we have our English term formed here in verse 1. Formed. And form in the Hebrew of our text is yatsar, which carries the meaning of Yah fashioning or framing something such as the nation of Israel. And there is a distinct understanding here with the use of Yasar that Yah brought Yisrael into existence. The prophet Isaiah, Yeshayahu, is the only author to use this term in this way. But Yatsar denotes Yah's creative and forming activity in the world, in particular the creation and forming of Yisrael, which the book of Genesis or Bereshit brilliantly documents. Anciently, Yatsar, in our English formed, alludes to the pressing of clay to form a useful implement such as pottery. It would involve pressing and squeezing of the intended object out of or into shape, such, again, as one would see done to clay that will ultimately form and shape, or be shaped, I should say, into pottery. Can you see the ramifications of this? Again, we could spend hours talking about this. The shaping of Yisrael. For a what? For a purpose. Consequently, taking what we've discussed here into consideration, we see that Yah brought Yisrael into existence, and he shaped Yisrael into a nation to what? Fulfill his divine purpose in the earth. And we'll talk more about this a little later in our discussion. So, what did Yah form Yisrael into? Or rather, what was Yah's intent when he brought Yisrael into existence and formed her into the nation he chose to enter into covenant with? Deuteronomy chapter 7, verse 6 talks about Yisrael would be a holy people unto Yah. Yisrael would be a set-apart people whom Yah chose or would choose to be a special people unto himself. This idea of being chosen people, a holy people. And then in Deuteronomy or Devarim chapter 7 verse 7 and chapter 7 verse 14, as well as chapter 14 verse 2, and Deuteronomy chapter 4 verse 37, all of these, Yisrael is described as a nation. Yisrael would be, of all the nation peoples of the world, Yah's exclusive special possession. They would be an exclusive special possession of Yah. And then in Deuteronomy or Devarim chapter 32 verse 9, Yisrael would be Yah's portion, Yah's possession from all the nation peoples of the world. Yisrael would be the lot of Yah's inheritance. Then we jump into the prophet of Isaiah, the prophecies of Isaiah, chapter 44, verse 21, where the prophet talks about Yaakov, and Yisrael would be Yah's servant. Yah's servant. And because Yisrael was a special beloved servant, she would not be forgotten by Yah. And then, still in the book of Isaiah, Yeshayahu, chapter 44, but expanded and discussed through verses 2 through 22, we hear or we read about Yah forming Yaakov or Yisrael from the womb. She would be Yah's special servant, again talking about Yisrael being his servant, Yah's chosen one in the earth. And lastly, chapter 45, verse 4 of Isaiah, Yisrael would be Yah's elect whom he called by name. Clearly, with all this and so much more, which we don't have time to really delve deeply into, Yisrael had the potential to be the most favored nation of the planet, or on the planet, the most blessed nation, the most powerful and prosperous nation on the planet. But unfortunately, Yisrael failed to live up to that potential and fulfill her end of the covenant bargaining. Thus, she was facing Yah's wrathful judgment. Nevertheless, with all of this facing Yisrael because of her sin and her abandonment of the covenant, Yah tells Yisrael that she should not fear because he has redeemed her, in verse 1 of our reading. Now, what about this redeeming, that Father redeemed Israel? Father created Israel and formed Israel into a nation to fulfill his purpose. And then he says, fear not, Israel, because I have redeemed you. The English term redeemed in the Hebrew is Ga'al. Ga'al, G-A-A-L, Ga'al, which implies that Yah was Yisrael's redeemer who would stand up for his chosen people. He would deliver them. He would vindicate them. And speaking of Yah's wrathful judgment coming upon Yisrael for her abandonment of Yah's covenant and her sin, there is a sense of judgment to be meted out, not just on Yisrael, but meted out or upon Yisrael's oppressors as a ransom for Yisrael. Anciently, Ga'al, this redeemed word in English, but Ga'al in Hebrew, alludes to a restoration of one to their former or original state or original position, as well as it alludes to the avenging of a loved one's death. Yah in our text informs Yisrael that he called them. He called them. So we have the formation of the nation, the creation and the formation of the nation for various reasons and purposes. Then we have the redemption of the nation because Yisrael is favored of Yah. Yisrael is Yah's favored servant. Now we talk about Yisrael was called by Father. He's called by Abba. Our English verb called in the Hebrew is gera. Gera, G-A-R-A, gera. Gera in this context suggests that Yah had appointed and commissioned Yisrael to accomplish special purposes in the earth, which would make them a special possession unto Yah. What could that special purpose be? Exodus chapter 19, verses 5 and 6. Here in this passage of Exodus, we get a real sense of what that calling and purpose was. And Moshe wrote, now therefore, if you will obey my voice, my being Yah's voice, Yah says, if you will obey my voice indeed and keep my covenant, then you shall be a peculiar treasure unto me above all people, for all the earth is mine. And you shall be unto me a kingdom of priests and an holy nation. A kingdom of priests, a holy nation. These are the words which you shall speak unto the children of Israel. Again, that was Exodus 19, verses 5 through 6. So Yisrael was and is meant to be a kingdom of priests and a set-apart nation people in the earth. For what? For the purpose of glorifying and honoring of Jehovah our Elohim, fulfilling his plan of salvation, restoration, and redemption. Yah declares unto Yisrael in our reading that he called her by name. Our English term name in Hebrew is Shem. Shem. S-H-E-M. Hebraically speaking, it denotes breath or breathe. It denotes character. Character. It turns out that Hebrew names are generally words given to someone or to places to describe the character of these individuals and places. Now, the breath of a man is associated with his character. It is that which makes one what he is, character. So the name of an individual, again, Hebraically, is more than an identifier. It is a descriptive of his or her character or breath. Yisrael was called by name according to her purpose and character. And because we have become engrafted into the commonwealth of Yisrael through the auspices of Yehoshua's atoning sacrifice and Yah's grand plan of salvation, redemption, and restoration, we can legally and righteously claim the name of Yisrael as our own. Now, the name or title Yisrael has several meanings. They generally are the same, but they're variations of the same meaning. Yisrael means Yah prevails, and or Yah rules as Elohim, or Yah retains Elohim, or Yah is upright. Clearly, there is some disparity in the meaning of the name Yisrael. Maybe better described, the title and name of Yisrael is multifaceted and is not restricted to just a single meaning. And that's the beauty of our Father. He's not just a one-trick pony. He is so complex in every facet of his being, even in the way he thinks. There is nothing that is one-dimensional with him. It is multidimensional. And it's meant to never fade out or to become boring. We can search one thing, one element of Yah and the things of Yah, only to find out that those things are inexhaustible in our searching and understanding and meditation, beloved. Oh, that's the wonderful thing about our faith. That's the wonderful thing about Torah. That's the wonderful thing about covenant living. There is an inexhaustible wealth of eternal truths contained therein, and we could spend our eternal lives. Our eternal lives would never be exhausted in the searching out of these wonderful truths. But we can clearly see that the nation and her people, Yisrael, carry upon themselves the name and the authority of the creator of the universe, Yehovah, Yahweh, Yahuwah, however you declare his name. Yisrael, the name Yisrael, carries upon it the authority, the name of the creator of the universe. When we look at the name Yisrael, when we look at it from I don't even know what to call it, but let's just say it consists of two elements. The first part of it is a verb. And that verb means to fight or contend. Remember back when his name was changed to Israel? It was changed after he fought with the angel of Yah. Some people say that was Yeshua. That was Yeshua. It was the pre-manifested or what is the term they use that Christianity denominationalism uses to describe the pre-incarnate? Yes. That's what happens when you're in your 60s and you start to show your age and your mental abilities. But yeah, the pre-incarnate Yeshua. I don't buy into the pre-incarnated thing, but if that's what you think it is, we don't need to part company over that. That's fine. If you say that it's the pre-incarnate Yeshua, then it was the pre-incarnate Yeshua, at least for you. But I believe it was just an angel of Yah. So he wrestled with an angel of Yah, and after that wrestling match, his name was changed to Yisrael. And the verb of the name Yisrael is to fight or contend. Jacob contended with Yah. It was symbolic. It was a physical fight, but it was also symbolic. It was spiritual. The contention. And then the second part, or the second element of the name or title Yisrael, is that of a personage. And that personage is El, which is the condensed form of Elohim. Now, the theophoric element, that's a big word, isn't it? Theophoric element of the name or title Yisrael defines the subject of the verb to fight and contend. Yah fights for Yisrael. Yah prevails as God. It's about Father being the preeminent being in the universe that does and prevails and is and exists and does. What a mantle to have as a title of the people you are. What does America mean? What does Britain mean? I'm sure there are meanings to these. What do any of the other nations mean in their name? But look at this, the potential and the name of Yisrael. It's all about Yah and his being and what he has and is and will do in the earth. And these people whom Yah chose to be his special servant have that appellation placed upon them, that mantle. And by virtue of us being engrafted into the commonwealth of Yisrael, we have the legal right to carry and bear that name. Praise Yah, from whom every blessing flows. Woo! And as mentioned previously, we find in Genesis, or Bereshit chapter 32, verse 28, that Yah renamed Yaakov, Yisrael. And so within the context in which Yaakov's name was changed to Yisrael, we get a sense of Yaakov having been chosen over Esau, over Esav, by Yah. And it would most certainly receive the victory and Yah's covenant promises as Yah would fight for and deliver him. Yah is in control. Yah will be our God. Hebraically speaking, names are extensively or extremely important to Yah and to the Hebrew historical biographical context. Recall that one of the first tasks assigned to Adam after he was placed in the Garden of Eden was what? For him to name every creature of Yah's animal creation. It goes back to Genesis or Bereshit chapter 2, verse 19. Next, Adam what? He named his wife Eve, or in the Hebrew, Kava, in Genesis chapter 3, verse 20. The text says that Adam named the woman Kava, or Eve, because she was the mother of all living. Again, the naming that was rendered unto Eve, or Kava, defined her purpose in Yah's grand plan of salvation, restoration, and redemption. And Torah tells us that Yaakov was named accordingly because he'd taken hold, or I should say Jacob was named accordingly because he'd taken hold of his twin brother Esau, or Esav's heel, when they were being born, as recorded in Genesis chapter 25, verse 26. It also follows that Yaakov would later seek to usurp his brother's birthright, despite him being the chosen one of Yah, who would ultimately become the patriarch of the 12-tribe nation of none other than Yisrael. In our Torah reading this week, we find that as Yaakov was dying on his deathbed, he blessed his 12 sons and his 2 grandsons. But in that blessing, he described each of his sons by name. And this is found in Genesis or Bereshit chapters 48 and 49. And it's a fascinating and important read with tremendous spiritual and eschatological significance attached to it. And I would highly encourage you, if you're so led, to read this passage when you get a chance. And then lastly, Yah claims Yisrael as his possession. He says, "You are mine, thou art mine." Once Yisrael straightens up and flies right, as Yah removes the scales from her eyes, her blinded eyes, as mentioned in Isaiah chapter 42, verse 7. And she turns her heart towards himself, turns her hearts towards him and the children of promise. Yisrael will ultimately teshuvah on that day, says Yah, they, Yisrael, will be mine. Yah says he will spare Yisrael in Malachi chapter 3, verse 17. Yah has not relinquished possession of Yisrael. You see, Yah chose Yisrael for reasons we may not understand fully until it is made known to us in the kingdom. Because he sees Yisrael as his peculiar treasure, as we've just talked about earlier, and is mentioned in Psalm chapter 135, verse 4. Yah says that Yisrael is not a happenstance because he formed the nation for himself. He created the nation for himself. He called her by name. In other words, Yah's purpose in the earth will be fulfilled in part through Yisrael. And because of Yisrael, again in part, he will receive the praise and honor he so justly deserves. Isaiah chapter 43, verse 21. But what about the other nation peoples of the world? Well, Yah, through the pen of Moshe, reveals that he, Yah, apportioned the nations of this world and left them to the oversight of the sons of Yah. That is, Yah left those other nations to the oversight of certain angelic overseers. And this is found in Deuteronomy or Devarim chapter 32, verse 8. Some of these angelic overseers, if you will, were apparently evil. Now, the Masoretic text cites these overseers of the nations as the sons of Yisrael, or Bnei Yisrael. This appears to be a patently intentional mistranslation. For the most ancient existing Hebrew text, or the extant Hebrew text of this passage, which predates the Masoretic text by more than 1,000 years. By the way, the Masoretic texts were written by a class of rabbinic scribes in around 1000 of the Common Era, 1000 AD, that basically their translation, their version of the Tanakh, the Old Testament, is the standard by which the vast majority of Hebrew commentary and teachings are based. The Masoretic texts have for centuries been the very text that many of our English translations have been based. The King James Version, is it the King James? Yeah, I believe it's the King James Version. And many, especially the JPS versions, the LEE version of the Old Testament and so forth. Many of these English translations base their interpretation. These English translations base their interpretation on the Masoretic text. This class of rabbinic scribes that took and wrote out, transcribed the original Hebrew text. And many, including myself, believe they took some liberties in their transcribing. But there are texts out there that predate, that were existing, that we have available to us, that are earlier than the Masoretic text by more than 1,000 years. And they render these beings, these overseers, as Bnei Elohim, or sons of Elohim. And this is in the Qumran Dead Sea Scrolls. Render this sons of Elohim, the Dead Sea Scrolls. Other ancient sources that predate the Masoretic text by 1,000 years or more is the Septuagint, the LXX, which renders these overseers as Eglon Theo, or angels of Yah. So which one is right? The earlier one or the more recent one of the Masoretes, or the Masoretes, or however you pronounce them? Now, assuming that the original text means the overseers were sons of God, or even they were angels, this gets us into what some refer as divine counsel stuff that I'm not prepared to go into today. But Suffice to take in verse 32, verse 9, where Moshe wrote that Yaakov, that Yisrael is Yah's special possession, or the portion of his inheritance. Yisrael would be assigned or belong exclusively to Jehovah Elohim, while the rest of the nations would be under the oversight of these sons of Elohim, Bene Elohim. The central point I'm attempting to get to here, although I've only scratched the surface of this amazing truth, is that Yah's focus is Yisrael. Yah's focus, I'm sorry to tell you, is not the church, despite the church's insistence to the contrary. It is through Yah's great plan of salvation, redemption, and restoration, however, that we who were once far off have been brought near to the blood, or brought near to Yah by the blood of Yeshua. Ephesians chapter 2, verse 13. Yeshua's person and ministry made it possible for us to be engrafted into the commonwealth of Yisrael. But contrary to denominationalist insistence, the church is not and will not replace Yisrael as Yah's chosen one. American conservatism, the Republicans, the religious component of the Republican Party has not displaced the nation of Israel. Our faith is not a separate faith from that of our ancient Hebrew cousins and the patriarchs, but rather our faith is a blessed extension, dare I say, our Yeshua-focused Torah living-based faith is our ancient Hebrew cousins' faith on steroids. It is the fulfillment of the original faith of our wandering cousins. None of this is to say that we convert to Orthodox Rabbinic Judaism and behave and worship as though we are Orthodox Jews or even Messianic Jews, such as donning the attire and garb of our Jewish brethren, reciting the liturgies, observing the traditions and such as B'Av, Tisha B'Av, and the 9th of Av. None of that is to say that we become Jewish. But if that's your thing, and you believe you've been called to take up and live and walk out Judaism as part of your walk with Messiah, well, I'd say have at it. Godspeed to you. But just take heed, beloved. Know which side, always know which side your spiritual bread is buttered in this respect. And don't blindly fall into the trap of placing your eternal security and your trusting faith in Judaism's traditions and laws and culture. For the truth of the matter is this, and the master's disciples turned apostles had to find this out the hard way themselves. Acts chapter 4, verse 12. There is, or I should say salvation. There is salvation in no other name. There is salvation in no other name under heaven given among men by which we must be saved. And that name, of course, is Yeshua HaMashiach. Our focus must be Yeshua, Messiah. Not rabbinic invented holidays, not rabbinic folklore and traditions and rules and customs and all of that. Again, I'm not disparaging anyone who chooses to do that. That's your thing, do it. But keep everything in its proper perspective, I say. Our eternal focus must be on seeking and walking out Yah's kingdom and his righteousness, as stated in Matthew 6, verse 33. And we achieve or put on or clothe ourselves, individually speaking, that is, in Yah's righteousness through the person and ministries of our Master, Yehoshua HaMashiach, and Abba's precious Holy Spirit, his Ruach HaKodesh. Thus, on an individual level, we must identify ourselves with Yehoshua Messiah, the author and finisher of our faith. Hebrews 12, verse 2. Yeshua Messiah, the mediator of our renewed covenant with Yah, that provides the framework by which we may enter in and remain in covenant relationship with Abba. Hebrews chapter 12, verse 24. And this is all facilitated by our being grafted into the commonwealth of Israel. Romans chapter 11, verse 17 through 24. That is true believing Yisrael, not Zionist Yisrael that so many of us have been duped over the decades into aligning ourselves with. True believing Yisrael. That is the commonwealth of Israel that we have been engrafted into. And because we have this unique calling and this mantle over our lives within the corporate homestead, if you will, the corporate homestead of the commonwealth of Israel, Ephesians chapter 2, verse 12, the way we conduct ourselves as disciples of Yahushua Messiah is meant to, in part, provoke our Jewish cousins to jealousy. Romans chapter 10, verse 19, which will no doubt in part lead to the removal or healing of the blindness that has gripped Orthodox Rabbinic Judaism or religious Israel for millennia. Romans chapter 11, verses 25 through 27, KJV rendering. For I would not, brethren, that you should be ignorant. This is Paul speaking to the Roman assembly. I would not that you should be ignorant of this mystery, lest you should be wise in your own conceits, that blindness in part is happened to Yisrael until the fullness of the Gentiles be come in. Verse 26. And so all Israel, let me repeat that, all Israel shall be saved, as it is written. There shall come out of Zion or Sion the deliverer, and shall turn away ungodliness from Jacob, from Yaakov. For this is my covenant unto them when I shall take away their sins. It's going to happen. And it's not going to be because we did something. It's because Yah is doing a work in the earth that he will bring back. He will redeem back his beloved Yisrael, who we have become engrafted into. All Yisrael will be saved. That's quite a statement and promise, is it not? So what's in a name? Well, in this case, a great deal. I say let us be fully aware of the name by which we've individually and corporately been called, and walk in that calling with fear and trembling and joy, knowing that our redemption draws ever so closely nigh each passing day. Luke chapter 21, verse 28, and Philippians chapter 2, verse 12. And with that, beloved, until next week, may you be most blessed, fellow saints in training. Shabbat Shalom, Shavua Tov, take care.